Welcome to Hope on the Rise Extended Edition. My name is Peter Englert. I am the host of this episode of Hope on the Rise. We are here with Dr. Bob Roden. Before I go any further, I want to let you all know that with our topic today, we have Four Faces of a Leader. Bob has 50 copies of his book, Four Faces of a Leader. If you go to his website, bobroden.com, and click subscribe, the first 50 people to subscribe will be mailed a free copy of this book. And if you're already a subscriber and you get someone else to subscribe, we will also give you a book. You just need to let us know. So thank you so very much. Bob, when you asked me to be a part of this podcast, this was probably the thing I was most excited about. And so, I want to kind of give our direction. One of my favorite quotes, I think it's my favorite quote from your book, Four Faces of the Leader, is maturity is producing more than we consume. And I've reminded myself of that, and I just think that that's huge. And I want to just frame our conversation for our listeners. Bob, you're going to give an overview about Four Faces of a Leader, but one of the things that I think is helpful is these four faces are something that all of us as leaders need to wear and also need to have. And so I think where you're going to go in this is, what does it look like if one of these faces is a struggle, or said more positively, is a growth area? So, Bob, I said a lot. I got my upstate New York accent going. I'm just going to let you take it away.
Hey, great to see you today, Peter, and it's always awesome to be together on this podcast. And I'm just as excited as you are, I think, today, because of this really is my understanding of leadership are these four faces. And I know there's a lot of stuff out there about leadership, but I think this really captures at least my heart. And when I think about leadership, when I think about the idea of a shepherd, that's the calling that's on our life. When I think about the idea of a servant, that's about the character of a leader. When I think about the idea of a steward, that's about competency. And we don't always like to talk about competency in ministry. That's a little bit tough. And then when I think about seer, that's about change, which is also very, very difficult for us. And we'll probably say this somewhere else in the podcast, but you can't just pick one of them and say, hey, I'll do that. We read all four faces. Now, the reality is you may be stronger in one or two of the faces than you are in the other two. But that's what you kind of, with your colleagues and other people, you can come to terms with that. So let's talk about what it might mean if you were deficient or you were struggling most in the idea of being a shepherd. I mean, what does that mean? I mean, this is really at the heart of what it means for pastoral care, serving people. For instance, think about people who go to the hospital. I mean, if you're uncomfortable in visiting people in the hospital, when I was pastoring, this was a top priority for us. When a person was going to be operated on, one of our pastors was there an hour and a half before surgery, prayed with that person, had a scripture verse with them. It's so huge in that person's life. Think about, here's somebody who cares about me, and they're here with me. So hospital visits, funerals. I mean, this time of grief in people's life, when you're there, they may not remember anything you say, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. That you were with them, you cared about them. And so if you don't have the face of a shepherd, you're going to miss those huge opportunities. Or if that's a struggle for you, I think we need to say this is part and parcel of what it means to be in ministry. I want to talk about protector as well. If you're not a shepherd, you won't protect the sheep. And Peter talks about about us serving as elders, and Jesus in John chapter 10 in particular talks about being the protector. Let me give you just a quick memory that comes to mind. I was always careful about guest speakers at the church, because you're just exposing your people, the people you're serving, to somebody that you know or whatever. And So I had this guest speaker come in that I felt okay about, but he said something in his message that was contrary to what we understood the Bible to teach about forgiveness. As a matter of fact, he talked about, hey, if you sin, you don't even have to confess it. God will just automatically forgive it. Well, I mean, you can just sort of feel the room. It was just almost froze for a moment. So at the end of this message and the end of the service, I simply stood up and said, folks, nothing's changed around here. We'll talk about some things next Sunday. So after the service, I spoke to the speaker and I said, I just want you to know that teaching that forgiveness comes without even asking. There's a step, and the Bible talks about that. He said, well, I've preached this message in a lot of other churches, and nobody's ever called me on this. I said, there's a first for everything. And I'm just speaking to you today to help you. I don't know how he received it, but we never had him back at the church. But the next Sunday, I stood up and I said, we love this speaker, and I don't know exactly what he was thinking about or if he just miscommunicated. And I explained to them that God does forgive, but there is confession for our sins, etc. It was like people said after, thank you for taking a moment to say something about that. The shepherd protects the sheep. That's a very important piece, I think, of who we are as leaders.
Hold on. I want to pause, Bob, before you get to the other three, because one thing I want our listeners to stick with us. We're sharing a lot about pastoring and ministry, but we realize that many of you work outside of pastoring and ministry. So I just want to encourage all of you, as Bob goes through the other three phases, look at this not only as pastoring and in the church, or if you're an elder or a volunteer, but there is so many direct corollaries to the marketplace. So I wanted to throw that caveat in there.
Couldn't agree more, Peter, because wherever you're serving, you're as a leader, you are to look out for your people. You're responsible for them. And so this works in any discipline, but we're obviously focusing on pastoring here. Thanks for noting that. That's a very good note. As servant, I think this might be the toughest one to talk about as having a challenge, because servant is about an attitude. It's really about an attitude more than anything else, and how you fully describe that can be challenging. But for instance, if you are as a servant, you're not concerned about titles. Servant is not a position; it's an attitude, and I do remember that. So if I'm all concerned about my titles, a person that's really concerned about those things, I say, hey, you need to think about having the face of a servant, or the person who walks in the room and says, well, here I am, rather than there you are. We had to be a there you are person. It's the focus is on other people. And it's so easy to think of ministry as a career rather than a calling. And then when I think of it as a career, it moves me into the entitlement ideas. And we all know that pastors across this country, and staff pastors as well, are probably not paid at the level of some other disciplines of leadership. That's a fact. But we don't go into it for the monetary gain. We want to be supported and taken care of. But as a servant, I say, you know what, Jesus, I'm believing and trusting you to help me, and I'm going to serve here, because I know going into this that there are some things that I won't have that maybe other people have in terms of monetary benefits. But I would say, as a person who's been in many years of ministry now, God will take care of you. God will take care of you. I don't mean that lightly, or that they just to sort of brush off any kind of financial needs that pastors have. But I know when we're called, God will help us. God will help us. I can give story after story about that. I won't take the time today. So servant, really, really huge. Then I want to just talk about steward for a moment. Competency. Wow. This is huge. This is really huge. If you're not competent to, let's say, to understand and execute a church budget, can you imagine the kind of turmoil there is? If you don't know how to run a meeting, For instance, a meeting always should have, first of all, the information items, action items, and visionary items. Those are the three categories for an agenda. Putting that together, it's competency in leading a meeting. It's so important that we understand this in our teaching and our preaching. It's preparation and all the effort that goes into that. I mean, if we're not a good steward of our time, it will eat us up. We'll say, wow. So it's just important that adequate preparation for whatever we do, because if we do the natural, then God will do the supernatural. That's important for us. And then finally, I want to just say a word about seer. This is not a word we use a lot. It's more for people in the Old Testament, people like Samuel and Amos, and I think it's some 25 times it's used in the Old Testament. But we talk about visionaries. Without vision, the church will perish. It says without vision, people perish. That's an older translation of Scripture. Or what the other translation says, they run wild. I mean, if you don't have vision, the church will get stuck. The church will get boring. The church will be a place where say, well, what are we doing here? There'll be confusion. It is important that every leader have vision. Now, again, we are different levels of visionary leaders, but everyone has to have vision. And finally, on vision to reach the world for Christ. If your mission is to reach the world for Christ, you'll never run out of something to do. Never. It's so vision is so critical to these ideas of the faces of a leader. And I want to encourage all of our friends today, Peter, to look at these four faces, to say, I want to be, like, my calling as a shepherd, my character as a servant, my competency as a steward, and my vision as a seer. Absolutely critical on these four faces that we have as leaders of God's people.
Man, you're making me want to read the book all over again. And also, I just want to encourage our listeners, you can go to Audible and buy the audio version, and Bob reads it. So I'd encourage you to do that. I highly recommend this book. I want to say a couple things kind of in response to that. So I took some time to think about my growth area. So probably my biggest growth area is always the stewardship one. And, when you say budgets, and kind of saying timing, and every Monday morning, and we're recording this on a Monday, I meet at 10 a.m. with a former principal of a Rochester City school and also a former mental health therapist supervisor. And I have learned a ton from Marion Shar about stewardship, about meetings, about details. And, it continues to be the biggest face that I struggle with and that I'm continuing to grow in. Probably the face that I relate to the most is the face of a shepherd. The day that we're recording this, my friend called me up and he said, Peter, I need you to come to the hospital, and kind of what you were saying. And he said, my niece, I don't know how long she has to live. She wants to get baptized. And I walked in there. She was coherent, and when people ask me that, I want to make sure that it's not forced upon and stuff. And I said, do you know Jesus? And she said yes, and she could barely talk. I said, do you want to get baptized? And it was absolutely.
Wow.
I took a paper towel, I filled it with water, and I baptized her. And that next morning, I got a text from my friend that she had gone home to be with Jesus. And last week was a really busy week, but that is the moment that I'm holding on to. And I kind of bring that up for our listeners because I think that this podcast is a conversation starter, with your coworkers, with your friends. Hey, here's the four faces. Which one do you struggle with? Which one are you natural at? And, one thing I want to throw to you, because we've talked a lot about pastoring, and I think it's super applicable. I actually think in the marketplace, the face that I see the most is kind of the seer or visionary, because there's a level of you need to see what's in the future. You need to understand what's going on. I think the area that people need to grow in the most, and we see this because we see books on emotional intelligence, is actually the shepherd. And so as I'm talking to business leaders, shepherding isn't just for pastoring. I mean, I think more and more people want to feel like, does this organization, does my boss care about me?
Yes.
I don't know. I'll throw that out to you. You know, if you were to kind of the people that you engage with in the marketplace, I mean, would you agree with that, or would you have a little nuance to that?
100% agree with it, Peter. I have a friend who was general manager of a car dealership, and he had the face of a shepherd. He cared about his people. I mean, when anything hit, for instance, when COVID hit, I mean, right away, wondering how we're going to take care of our people. What are we going to do with the people that we serve here? I think that the shepherding piece really comes across to folks, and it will enable them to serve others, because if you shepherd them, then the way they treat customers is also very, very important. I was doing this teaching one time actually it was in Pennsylvania. It was in Pittsburgh, and a lady was in the meeting. She happened to run a nursing school, and she said, "I can use this to teach people about care for others. Nurses naturally should be people who care for others." But she said, this idea, this gives it a value. This is being the face of a shepherd to people. And, when we just offer the kind of general care, the gentle touch, we say, the gentle voice, it's so helpful to people, particularly in hospitals. But when you see somebody who's had any kind of an issue in their life, and you just say to them, "I care about that. I care about you." Wow, that is really, really huge for people. So I think you're right. I want to have the face of a shepherd first. To me, I think that's tops. And for me, I think I have the face of a seer. I have to work on the other two, the steward and the servant part. But every one of us needs all four of these faces, and I think the prominent one should be shepherd.
We have a little bit of time. I actually want to, in our recent conversation, the only one we didn't talk about was servant. And what I've been thinking about with the face of a servant is whether you're a pastor or a business leader, there's a lot of, whether we like it or not, do as I say, not as I do. And I think one of the values in my life that I'm trying to grow in is I'm not going to ask somebody to do something that I'm not willing to do.
Yes.
Just this morning, there's a difference between not being willing to do it and then realize you're not gifted to do it. This morning I was meeting with one of my teammates. Her name's Donna. Donna is like servant of all servants. And I thank God that she is good at spreadsheets, because we're trying to make labels for this conference. And, I think most of our conversation was, what do you need from each other? And, I just kind of think about, I'll never forget this too. My pastor, his name's Bill Kirk. Bill tells this story. He had preached at this conference, and, he had felt like $1 million. And he walked into First Assembly of God in Binghamton, and it was like a men's night, and someone said to him, "Hey, we're out of toilet paper." And he said, that was kind of the voice of God to remember, hey, we're never too big enough to serve. And I think all of us have those examples too.
I couldn't agree more, Peter. And I'm just so excited that we've had this opportunity today to talk about four faces of leader. And thank you again for just being a person that we've connected with over the years, and for your enthusiasm about this aspect of leadership. Just great to be connected to you today.
It's great. Well, just as we close this episode, I want to remind you all that go to bobroden.com, click subscribe to the email. And if you're already subscribed, make sure you share this with a friend. Let us know that you've subscribed, because we want to give you one of those 50 copies of Four Faces of the Leader. And I'd also encourage you, there's some of you here, you lead individuals. We want to give you a free book, but I think also this is worth buying 4 or 5 copies to your team, buying the Audible and listening to I quote it often. So we want to thank you for joining us on Hope on the Rise Extended Edition. We'll look forward to seeing you next month.
All right.